Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it on my side. Do not be faithless, but believe it. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Take a seat. All right, so what did you do with spring? It was all nice and warm, and then suddenly winter came back. What's the deal? I think one of you must have taken it and run off with it someplace. But anyways, this is Texas. I'm sure it'll warm up in no time at all. But today is traditionally called by the church Low Sunday. And this is because after all the busyness of the Easter celebration, now this is kind of our first Sunday to slow down and take a break. Most priests have been probably on vacation for all of this past week after Holy Week. But this Sunday, the church has always traditionally looked at this passage, the passage of the man whom we like to call Doubting Thomas. And of course, Doubting Thomas always kind of gets a bad rap, doesn't he? Of course, we've given him that forename there, Doubting Thomas. And then we look upon him as if that doubting is such a terrible thing. And it's marred his name as an apostle for 2,000 years. But I think that there's far more that we can take from St. Thomas other than just the name doubting. As a matter of fact, I think that there's a way in which each of us can find ourselves in Thomas. I think in many ways there's a way in which each of us ought to become Thomas. And I think Thomas might have more virtues than we see at first sight. So that being the case, I want to come down, not at the very beginning of the passage, but all the way down here to this brief little phrase where it says, the doors were shut when Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. The first little bit that I want to focus on here is that the doors were shut. This isn't the first time that this happens in this passage, all the way back at the very beginning of the week. And notice, this lecture begins on the evening of the first day of the week. What would that be? Sunday. So that was the day of resurrection. That was Easter. And now, if you look down, all of this with Thomas is taking place a whole week later on this Sunday, which is why we celebrate Doubting Thomas on this Sunday, this very passage. But that being the case, we see that the doors were shut on the first day of the week as well, out of fear. Out of fear of the Jews. And as I look at this passage, and when I think of it within the context of Doubting Thomas himself, I find something that hasn't changed very much in 2,000 years. I don't think that these doors being shut are just the doors of their building or the doors of their room. But oftentimes, I find Christians all throughout society shutting their doors as well. Now, for today, I'm not talking about shutting our doors to the poor or shutting our doors to the needy. Rather, in another way, I'm talking about shutting the doors of our mind. I find far too often that we as Christians run away from the challenges of our society in fear. I find that far too often we as Christians are far too willing to create a Christian ghetto. I find far too often that we as Christians are not willing to listen to those who disagree with us. That we're not willing to accept the challenges of those who don't see things as we do. And I, as a priest, find this to be a scary thing. Because once we have closed our ears and closed our eyes and closed our mouths and hidden away in a corner someplace, we will find that we have shut ourselves off from every possibility of a true, vibrant, and living faith. I think that this is a grave danger in Christian society. We as Christians are often accused of indoctrinating and then shutting off all discussions. And I always find it kind of surprising when I run into people, especially as a priest, when I run into other Christians who aren't willing to question. willing to open up their doors and look at the other side, who aren't willing to actually take a step, really, in faith, and put trust in the God who's there. Do you see what ends up happening when we shut our doors? Shutting our doors is in reality an act of doubt, an act of true, deep doubt in the ability of God, in a sense, to defend himself. The fascinating thing about these disciples and about St. Thomas is they had heard from others that Jesus had risen, but they still feared. They didn't trust that God was actually powerful enough to do that. They didn't seem to trust that Jesus Christ was actually powerful enough to walk into that room and show himself. Well, I think that if anything, this passage has a single message for us today. And it's that Jesus Christ tends to show up in places that we don't expect him. Jesus Christ is not quite as weak as all of us seem to think. And when we're not willing to step up to the challenges of the challenger, it is a vote of doubt in God's power to prove himself. Jesus Christ has a way of showing up in locked rooms, behind locked doors, in places that we don't expect him to be. Here's the funny thing that Christianity has always taught about truth. Truth has like nature to good. And truth and goodness have like nature to light. Christianity has always taught that evil, like light and dark, that evil is the absence of good in the same way that darkness is the absence of light. In order to have darkness, you have to block the light. But the light is still there. The light is always prior. In the same way, in order to have evil, you have to block the good. But the good is still there. In the same way with truth, in order to have untruth, you have to have truth first. In order to have a lie, you have to be able to twist the truth. Every lie has some truth at the very foundation of it. Isn't it fascinating that the Scriptures decided to call Satan a deceiver? Because all Satan does is takes the truth of God and twists it and changes it. But the fact of the matter is that once you take away all the twisting and the changing, at the bottom of that is still truth. In other words, what Christianity has always taught is that there's no way to teach an untruth without having a little bit of truth thrown in there with it. And if you look at the church fathers, you'll find that many of them taught that we ought to go around our world not as very negative, naysaying people, but as people who are very positive, people who have trust in the truth of God, people who are willing to go around even to those who disagree with us and find the truth in their arguments and build from there. To begin creating those connections with truth and allow the truth to prevail. Because if anything, we as Christians ought to have faith that truth can prevail. That truth is something worth holding on to. That truth is something worth fighting for. And nay, that truth is something that can fight for itself. That the true power is where the truth is. The church fathers used to say that we should be like the Israelites coming out of Egypt, who though coming out of slavery took the treasures of Egypt with them. We shouldn't live with our doors shut out of fear. We should live in faith in the truth. And we should find that treasure of truth wherever it may be found and let it prevail. Now, if this is the truth, if this is real, if this is what Christianity has historically taught, then I believe that changes the way that we look at doubting Thomas. I don't think we can any longer stand here and simply condemn doubting Thomas as a doubter and shake our finger at him. No, on the contrary, I think that doubting Thomas was actually doing the right thing. Listen to what he said. "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand in his side, I will not believe." Note, he's upping the game here. If you look up at the top, Jesus appears before the other disciples. He doesn't say, "Put your hand in the holes in my hand." He doesn't say, "Put your hand in the holes in my side." All it says is this: when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. There's no touching involved, only showing. St. Thomas said, "I want to up the ante. I want to push it a little bit further. I want to know for absolutely sure that this is the truth." And if Jesus is Jesus, he can prove himself. I want you to notice one thing. For St. Thomas to say this, I don't believe was a mere act of total doubt. I don't believe it was a total act and a total absence of belief. Rather, it was a vote for the truth of Christ. It was a vote for the power of God. It was a vote for the power of the truth to win out, no matter the obstacles. And he displayed a willingness to look and to follow through, and to see it all laid out before the entire world. And I believe that because St. Thomas was willing to look, was willing to fight, was willing to question, in the end it gave him a stronger faith than even the others had. And not only that, but it gave us this story so that we ourselves could look back, and his own doubt could strengthen our own faith. So that his hands going into the hands of Jesus and his hands going into the side of the spear mark could be our hands as well. So that we, by this eyewitness, can verify our own faith. As a matter of fact, St. John the Evangelist says that that's the very purpose of having written this story. St. John says at the end of our lecture, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Do you see? St. Thomas's questioning not only led to his belief, but belief of generations and generations and generations, for centuries and now millennia. My friends, a lot of us get scared of doubt, whether the doubt of our own selves or the doubt of those we love. But that is not a vote for truth. Doubt, my friends, is nothing more than the seed of faith. Faith in its embryonic form. And like any seed, unless you plant it and care for it and give it what it needs, it will never grow into the beautiful flower that is intended to be, or the wonderful fruit or vegetable that is intended to feed others. And far too often we do the exact same thing with our faith, without having an inquisitive mind that is willing to explore our faith. We end up with nothing more than a dead seed that is never able to produce. May our faith be a seed that is planted in the ground, that is fertilized, that is watered, that is given plenty of sunshine, that it can grow to some beautiful tree that can provide shade and food for all those around us. For faith to be faith, it needs to be challenged. But when it's challenged, it becomes a stronger faith. Finally, the last thing that I hope we're able to see from this text is the product. Listen to what Jesus says to Thomas. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless, but believing." My friends, this is something far more and far deeper than your run-of-the-mill scar story. You know, guys like to tell their scar stories. Well, this isn't just that. Think of how very intimate this is. Jesus telling Thomas to put out his hand and to put it in the very holes that saved his soul. Because of St. Thomas's doubt, because of his questioning, because of his inquisitiveness, he was able to do something that maybe no other human being on earth has had the privilege. Can you imagine what that would be like? Imagine what that would be like to put out your hands and to feel the holes, to feel the scars, to feel the skin that was sacrificed and raised for you and for me. Don't you get tingles just thinking about it? The result of St. Thomas's inquisitiveness was a personal, meaningful contact with the risen Lord that he may not have gotten any other way. And my friends, it is precisely there that faith comes to fruition. That seed that is planted in the question grows and blooms into a full, real, true, and meaningful faith. And it is when we ourselves have personal contact with the risen Lord himself. What is it that keeps Christianity alive for century after century, and now millennia after millennia? Other than every single believer coming in personal contact with the risen and living Lord Jesus Christ himself. Millions and millions and billions and billions of people claim to have had personal contact with someone who was crucified 2,000 years ago. And though it might sound crazy, what makes it not crazy is the fact that millions and millions and billions of people for thousands and thousands of years have made the same claim again and again and again. That today, if you're willing to be inquisitive and to search, you too can have this personal contact with the risen and living Lord. Jesus Christ comes to every one of us, and he says, "Here, touch the nail prints. Put your hand in my side. Know me for who I am. Allow the truth to be powerful, and allow the truth to prevail. We have nothing to fear." And so let us, with St. Thomas, hear Christ say to us as well, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless, but believe." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.